You did everything right. You spent less than you earned. You built up your savings. You moved your money into a high-yield account when the rates climbed. And now you've got a solid chunk of cash sitting there, growing every single month without you lifting a finger. That should feel like winning. So why, when you actually sit down and crunch the real numbers, does it start to feel like something else entirely? That feeling hit Marcus hard. He's 34, works in IT outside of Columbus, Ohio, makes decent money, and about 18 months ago, he moved $40,000 into a high-yield savings account. The rate at the time? 4.8%. He watched the interest deposit every month like clockwork. No risk, no stress, no volatility, just quiet, steady growth. He felt like he'd finally figured something out that most people hadn't. And then one Sunday afternoon, he actually ran the math. Not the easy math, the real math. And what he found changed the way he thinks about money permanently. Here's what most people don't talk about when they celebrate their savings account rate. The number you see advertised, that's the gross number. The before taxes, before inflation, before everything number. The IRS doesn't treat interest from a savings account like a gift. They treat it like income. Same as your paycheck, same as your freelance work, same as every dollar you earned with your time. If you're in the 22% federal tax bracket, you owe 22 cents on every dollar your savings account generates. And if you live in a state that taxes interest income, add a few more cents on top of that. So for Marcus, that $40,000 at 4.8% earned him roughly $1,900 in a year. Sounds decent, right? After a combined federal and state tax rate of around 24%, he kept closer to $1,450. Not $1,900, $1,450. That's the first gap nobody shows you on the landing page. But there's a second one, and this one's quieter. Inflation was running between 3 and 4% through most of 2023 and into 2024. What that means in plain terms is this: if your money earns 4.8% in a year, but everything you'd spend that money on gets 3% more expensive during that same year, your actual gain in purchasing power is closer to 1.8% before taxes. After taxes, that real gain shrinks even further. Financial researchers who study this stuff put the actual inflation-adjusted, after-tax, return for a typical middle-income earner in a high-yield savings account at somewhere between 1.5% and 2%, not 4.8, 1.5. Now that's still positive. That's still meaningfully better than the traditional savings account that was paying basically nothing a few years ago. But it's a completely different story than the one most people are telling themselves. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. While Marcus' $40,000 was quietly earning its real after-tax return of around 1.5%, the stock market was doing something very different. In 2023 alone, the S&P 500 returned over 26%. 26. If Marcus had put that same $40,000 into a low-cost index fund instead of a savings account, he'd have ended the year with roughly $50,400. Instead, he had about $41,900. That's an $8,500 difference in a single year from what felt like two equally responsible decisions. And that gap has a name in finance. It's called opportunity cost. It's the most expensive invisible fee in personal finance, and nobody ever sends you a bill for it. Here's what makes it really land. Think about $20,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account for 30 years at a solid 4% average return. After 30 years, that balance grows to about $65,000. Now take that same $20,000, invest it in a diversified index fund, earning the market's long-term historical average of around 10%. After 30 years, about $314,000. Same money, same 30 years. A gap of nearly $285,000. Nobody chose to leave that money behind, but millions of people do it anyway. One comfortable savings account, balance at a time. Now, before you close this video and start moving everything into the market, stop. Because that's not the lesson here. And overcorrecting is just as costly as the original mistake. The high-yield savings account isn't a bad tool. It's an incredible tool for a very specific job. And that job is holding money you might need soon. Your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of real living expenses. A down payment you're making in the next 1 to 2 years. Cash you genuinely cannot afford to see drop 30% the week before you need it. For that purpose, a high-yield savings account is exactly right. It's liquid, it's insured, up to $250,000 per depositor, and it earns a real return without market risk. The problem isn't the account. The problem is what happened to Marcus. And what's probably happened to a lot of people watching this. The account quietly took on a job it was never designed to handle. Here's the pattern. You build your emergency fund. Smart move. Then you keep adding to the savings account because it feels productive. The number goes up. You feel accomplished. And somewhere along the way, that account stops being emergency money and starts becoming your entire financial strategy. You delay opening a brokerage account because things feel fine. You put less urgency into your retirement contributions because the savings balance looks healthy. The cushion becomes a reason to wait, and waiting has a price. The feeling of financial safety and the reality of financial progress are not the same thing. They often feel identical. They rarely are. There's one more thing Marcus noticed that he didn't expect. When the Federal Reserve started cutting rates in late 2024, those high-yield account rates didn't hold. Accounts that had been paying 5% dropped to 4.5%, then 4%, then 3.5%. By early 2026, the best available rates from competitive online banks had settled around 4%, still solid by historical standards. But the window that made these accounts feel like a revolution, it had narrowed. And unlike an index fund, which grows because the businesses inside it hire people, build products, generate real revenue, a savings account rate is just whatever a bank decides to offer you today. It has no floor. There's no asset underneath it growing on its own. The market's 10% historical average has outlasted every rate cycle in American history. A savings account rate is a temporary number on a web page. That's a meaningful difference. So what's the real takeaway from all of this? 3 things. First, calculate your real return, not the advertised rate, the after-tax, after-inflation number. For most middle-income earners, it's closer to 1.5% to 2%. Still positive, but not the story you've been telling yourself. Second, size the savings account correctly. 3 to 6 months of actual living expenses. That's the job it was built for. Money beyond that threshold probably has a longer time horizon than a savings account is designed to handle. Third, understand the difference between safety and progress. A large savings balance feels like financial success, but comfort and momentum are 2 different things. Marcus understood that. He didn't close his savings account. He just stopped letting it do a job it was never meant to do. If this kind of honest, clear breakdown of how money actually works is what you've been looking for, subscribe to Money IQ Pro. We make simple, straightforward videos about money, wealth, and financial decisions that most people figure out too late. No hype, no promises, just the real stuff. The most powerful financial decision you'll ever make isn't finding the perfect account. It's understanding what your money is actually doing and making sure it's working as hard as your future is going to need it to.